The small roadside diner sat at the edge of town, just off the highway where long drives usually met tired travelers. It wasn't fancy, but people loved it for its homely charm and warm food. The walls were lined with old photos, the kind that told stories of the place's past, families, truckers, and friendly faces who'd stopped in over the years. The scent of brewed coffee mixed with the smell of freshly baked pie. It was one of those afternoons where everything felt slow and calm. The regulars chatted softly in their booths. The waitress, a kind woman with tired eyes but a patient smile, moved from table to table refilling cups and asking if anyone needed more sugar. The hum of conversation blended with the faint music playing from an old jukebox near the counter. At the corner table sat an older man who came in often. He didn't talk much but always left a good tip. He liked to sit by the window where the sunlight touched his face. He had steady hands, a calm expression, and a presence that made people feel safe around him. The waitress often said that when he was there, the diner somehow felt quieter, more peaceful. He wore a simple jacket, an old watch, and a faded military-style cap that looked like it had been with him for years. Some customers guessed he was a veteran, but no one asked. He didn't carry himself like someone looking for attention. He just came in, ordered his meal, ate quietly, and left with a polite nod. That day, the peaceful routine broke. The sound of loud engines echoed outside the diner before the door swung open with a sharp jingle. A group of bikers walked in, 5 of them, maybe 6, laughing, shouting, and talking over each other. Their boots thudded heavily against the floor, breaking the calm atmosphere instantly. People inside looked up for a moment and then quickly back down at their plates. Everyone knew how these kinds of things usually went. The bikers weren't locals, but they'd been seen passing through the area before. They liked to stop, act tough, and make sure everyone noticed them. They took over 2 booths near the center of the diner. The waitress approached them with her polite smile still in place, but her voice was a little nervous when she said, "Afternoon, fellas. What can I get you?" "Coffee," one of them said with a grin that wasn't friendly. "And make it strong," another one added. "And pie. Don't mess up the order like last time." The group laughed loudly and she forced a smile, nodding before hurrying off to the counter. Their laughter filled the small space, making it feel smaller than it was. They made jokes about the food, about the customers, about anything they could think of, the kind of jokes meant to make others uncomfortable. At first, everyone tried to ignore them. The couple near the window finished their lunch faster than usual and left. 2 truckers sitting by the counter paid their bill early and walked out quietly. Soon, the only people left were the waitress, the cook in the back, and the old man still sitting in his corner, slowly finishing his soup. The bikers noticed him. "Hey, check that guy out," one of them said loudly, pointing toward the corner. "He's just sitting there like a statue." "Maybe he's asleep," another laughed. "Or maybe he's scared." The others joined in the laughter, slapping the table and making more noise. But the man didn't even look up. He lifted his spoon, took another quiet sip, and set it down gently. His calmness only seemed to make them more restless. They started talking even louder, hoping for a reaction. But nothing changed. The man didn't move faster, didn't speak, didn't even glance their way. He just kept eating, slowly and peacefully. One of the bikers got up and walked closer to him. His heavy boots echoed with every step. The others whistled and cheered him on. "Go on, show him who's boss," one said with a grin. The man didn't look up. The biker stopped beside his table, crossed his arms, and said, "You deaf, old man? You didn't hear us talking to you?" The old man didn't answer. He reached for his napkin, wiped his mouth, and set it neatly beside his plate. Then he looked up, not angrily, not scared, just calm. His eyes were clear, steady, and they met the bikers without a hint of fear. "I heard you," he said quietly. "I just didn't think you needed a reply." The biker frowned, not expecting that kind of answer. The tone wasn't rude. It was simple, direct, and strangely confident. The rest of the group laughed again, but the biker standing there didn't seem as amused anymore. He looked down at the table and saw the old military cap resting there. The cap was worn, its fabric faded, but the emblem on the front was still visible. He picked it up and turned it in his hands. "Nice hat," he said mockingly. "You a soldier or something?" The diner went silent again. The waitress froze behind the counter. Even the jukebox seemed quieter. The man looked at his cap for a moment in the biker's hands and then back at him. His voice stayed calm. "I was," he said simply. "Now I'm just trying to finish my lunch," the biker smirked. "Oh yeah? What's the big deal about this old thing anyway?" He tossed the cap lightly onto the next table, letting it slide across the surface. The man's eyes followed it, but his face didn't change. He stood up slowly. His movements weren't rushed, and somehow that made everyone in the room pay attention. He was tall, maybe not as strong as he once had been, but there was something about the way he stood. Solid, balanced, in control. He picked up his cap, brushed it off gently, and placed it back on the table. Then, without raising his voice, he said, "That hat's been through more than you have. It deserves more respect than you're showing yourself right now." The biker stared at him, unsure how to respond. For a moment it looked like he might say something back, but the words didn't come. The others laughed again, but their laughter sounded a little less certain now. The man sat back down, as calm as ever, and took another sip of his coffee. One of the bikers leaned over to the one who had tried to provoke him and whispered something. Whatever it was, it made him frown and sit back down too. They went quiet for a moment, trying to decide what to do next. The waitress finally exhaled softly and returned to pouring coffee, pretending not to have seen any of it. But the tension stayed in the air, heavy and uneasy. Minutes passed. The bikers went back to talking, though quieter than before. The old man finished his meal, folded his napkin neatly, and placed a few bills on the table. He glanced at the waitress and gave her a small, kind nod. She smiled back, grateful, though her hands were still trembling slightly. When he stood up to leave, every eye in the diner followed him. He didn't rush, didn't look back at the bikers, didn't say another word. He simply picked up his cap, placed it carefully on his head, and walked out the door. The bell above it jingled softly, and then the sound of his truck engine faded down the road. Inside, nobody spoke for a while. The bikers sat silently, their earlier noise gone. Something about that quiet man's calm had taken the wind out of their arrogance. The waitress finally broke the silence. "You shouldn't have messed with him," she said softly. "Why not?" one of the bikers asked, though his voice wasn't as confident as before. She looked at them with a steady expression. "Because that man's seen things that'd make your loud talk seem small. He's been through battles most people wouldn't survive. You think he's scared of you?" She shook her head. "He's not. He's just too smart to waste his time proving it." The bikers didn't reply. They stared down at their coffee cups, suddenly finding the table very interesting. From outside, the sound of the highway faded in the distance. The afternoon sunlight filled the diner again, and slowly the normal rhythm returned. The cook peeked out from the kitchen, asking if everything was okay. The waitress nodded, but everyone inside knew that something had shifted. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't shouting or threats. It was something simpler, the kind of calm strength that makes noise feel weak. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything, and though no one said it out loud, everyone there felt a quiet kind of respect for the man who had walked out, the man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. The next afternoon, the same small diner buzzed with quiet talk. The story of what happened the previous day had already started to spread around town. People couldn't stop talking about the calm old man who stood up to the bikers without shouting or fighting. Some had seen it happen. Others heard about it from the waitress, who shared the story in bits and pieces. Everyone seemed to have a different version. Some said the old man stared the bikers down until they froze. Others claimed he said something so wise it left them speechless. But everyone agreed on one thing. The bikers didn't look so proud when they left. The waitress still felt uneasy thinking about it. She kept replaying the scene in her mind. The quiet way he spoke, how he didn't flinch even when one of them took his hat. It wasn't anger in his eyes. It was something else, a kind of peace mixed with power. She couldn't quite explain it, but it stayed with her. Around noon, she was setting up the tables when she saw the same group of bikers riding past the diner again. The sound of their engines made her chest tighten. For a second, she thought they'd stop again, but they kept going, disappearing down the road. She sighed in relief, but couldn't shake the thought that they might come back later. Meanwhile, the old man from yesterday, the veteran, was nowhere to be seen. He didn't show up at his usual time for lunch. He probably had no idea how much people were still talking about him. For him, it was just another day, another meal, another quiet drive home. But for the people in that diner, he had left a lasting mark. Later that afternoon, the bikers did come back. This time, they didn't burst in with loud laughter. They walked in slower, quieter, but the same tension filled the room. The waitress froze mid-step, holding a tray. Her voice came out carefully. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Coffee again?" The one who had taken the hat yesterday gave a short nod. "Yeah, coffee and pie." They took the same seats as before. The rest of the customers, already recognizing them, went quiet. The atmosphere turned heavy again, but something about the group seemed different. They weren't as loud, not yet anyway. It was as if they were unsure of themselves now. The waitress served them quickly and tried to keep her distance. The cook peeked out from the kitchen window, whispering, "They're back?" She nodded. "Yeah, and I hope they don't start anything this time." The door opened again, and just like that, everyone's attention shifted. The old man had returned. He walked in calmly, the same way he always did, with quiet steps and a relaxed face. His faded jacket hung neatly on his shoulders and his old cap sat proudly on his head. He looked around once, then made his way to his usual corner seat. He didn't even glance at the bikers. The waitress's heart steadied a little. Somehow his presence made her feel safer again. She walked over with her notepad. "The usual?" she asked softly. He smiled gently. "Yes, please." The moment he sat down, the diner felt different. Not tense, but balanced again, as if everything was back in order. The bikers noticed it too. They exchanged looks, some uneasy, some defiant. The leader, the one who had mocked him before, shifted in his seat. He couldn't explain it, but something about that man bothered him, not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't do. Most people got scared or angry when challenged. This man didn't. It was like nothing could shake him. "Hey," one of the bikers whispered. "That's him, right?" The leader nodded. "Yeah, the old guy." They watched him for a while. He sipped his coffee, looked out the window, and seemed lost in thought. Every movement was slow and deliberate. Finally, the leader said quietly, "I want to talk to him." The others looked at him in surprise. "You sure about that?" He nodded again and stood up. The room fell silent as he walked toward the veteran's table. The waitress froze near the counter, ready to step in if things got bad. The leader stopped beside the table. The veteran looked up, calm as always. "Mind if I sit?" the biker asked. The old man nodded once. "Go ahead." He sat down slowly. For a few seconds, neither said a word. The leader stared at his cup, unsure how to start. Finally, he said, "About yesterday. I shouldn't have taken your hat." The veteran didn't respond right away. He just studied the man's face. Then he said quietly, "You didn't take it because you wanted the hat. You took it because you wanted attention." The biker looked down, realizing it was true. The old man continued, "When people make noise, it's usually because they want to feel bigger than they are, but real strength doesn't need to shout." The words weren't said harshly. They were calm, matter-of-fact, like advice from someone who'd seen enough of life to understand it deeply. The biker nodded slowly, unsure what to say. "I guess I've been doing that for a long time," he admitted quietly. The veteran didn't judge him. "Maybe, but that can change." Across the diner, the others were watching, whispering among themselves. They had expected a confrontation, not a quiet conversation. The leader hesitated, then said, "You were in the army, right?" The veteran nodded. "A long time ago." "What was it like?" The old man looked out the window for a moment before replying. "It was hard. You see the best and the worst of people. You learn who you are when things fall apart." The biker leaned back, listening closely. "I always thought soldiers were, tough because they fight." The veteran smiled faintly. "Fighting doesn't make you tough. What makes you tough is knowing when not to." That line hit him deeper than he expected. He didn't know why, but something about it stuck. They talked a bit more. Not much, just simple words between two very different men. One trying to understand, the other offering quiet wisdom without preaching. The other bikers grew restless. One of them finally stood and walked over. "Hey, what's going on?" You turning soft now? He said to their leader. The veteran turned to look at him, his eyes steady. He's not turning soft, he's turning smart. The biker blinked, caught off guard by the calm tone. He muttered something under his breath and walked back to his seat, but even he didn't sound confident anymore. The waitress watched the whole thing unfold, almost in disbelief. She had never seen anyone talk to that group like that, and definitely not with so much control. No shouting, no threats, just simple truth. After a while, the biker leader stood up. "Thanks," he said quietly, "for, not making it worse yesterday." The old man nodded. "You made your choice today. That matters more." He left the table and walked back to his group. They looked at him, confused. "What was that all about?" one asked. "Nothing," he said simply. "Just talking." But it wasn't nothing. Something in his tone was different, calmer, less proud. Even his friends noticed. The old man finished his meal and stood up to leave. As he passed by their table, the leader spoke again. "Hey, sorry for the trouble." The veteran paused, looked at him and said, "Trouble's only trouble if you don't learn from it." Then he gave a small nod and left the diner. The sound of the door closing behind him seemed to carry a kind of finality. The waitress walked over to the biker's table, nervous but curious. "So, that's it?" she asked. The leader nodded. "Yeah, that's it." He looked down at his coffee, lost in thought. "That old man, he's different." She smiled faintly. "He's lived enough life to know what matters." For the rest of the afternoon, the diner stayed unusually quiet. The bikers didn't make a scene. They paid for their food, left a small tip, and rode off without the roaring laughter they usually had. As they disappeared down the road, the waitress watched from the window. She had seen something rare that day. Not just a lesson, but a change beginning in people who thought they were beyond change. Inside the diner, the cook came out wiping his hands. "They're gone?" She nodded. "For now. But something tells me they'll come back. Maybe not to cause trouble this time." He laughed softly. "You think that old man scared them?" She shook her head. "No, he didn't scare them. He showed them what real strength looks like." The cook thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That sounds about right." Outside, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. Somewhere down the road, the sound of the bikers' engines faded into the distance, quieter now, almost respectful. And at that little diner, peace returned again. The next few days at the small diner were unusually quiet. The waitress noticed that things felt calmer, almost as if that short encounter between the veteran and the bikers had left behind an invisible layer of peace. Customers who had been there that day still talked about it in low voices. The waitress would often catch herself thinking about how the old man handled everything. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened anyone. He didn't even seem angry. Yet somehow he managed to make a group of grown men stop in their tracks and think about their behavior. It was something she couldn't forget. One evening, just before sunset, she saw a familiar pickup truck pull into the diner's small parking lot. She smiled automatically. It was the veteran again. He stepped out slowly, wearing his same faded jacket and his worn-out cap. His steps were steady, and there was something peaceful about his routine. Inside, a few customers were already finishing their meals. The waitress walked up to his usual booth, not even needing to ask for his order. "The usual?" she said with a friendly tone. He smiled gently. "Yes, thank you." As she turned to go, she paused. "You know, people are still talking about what happened last week." He gave a small chuckle. "People like stories more than silence." She tilted her head. "Maybe, but you handled those guys better than anyone else could have." The sheriff said the same thing. He didn't reply for a moment. Then he said, "When you've lived long enough, you learn that anger is just noise. Silence makes more sense." She smiled softly and went back to the counter. Not long after, another familiar sound broke the calm, the deep rumble of motorcycle engines outside. The waitress froze for a moment. She looked toward the window, her stomach tightening. The bikers were back again, but something about the way they parked and got off their bikes seemed different this time. There was no laughter, no shouting, no show of arrogance. They walked in quietly, one after another. A few regulars turned to look, expecting trouble again, but the bikers only nodded politely at the waitress and took a seat in the corner. The veteran noticed them but didn't say anything. He simply sipped his coffee and continued reading the newspaper in front of him. The waitress approached the bikers' table cautiously. "Coffee and pie again?" she asked. The leader nodded. "Yeah, please." His tone was softer than before, polite, almost humble. The others just nodded, saying nothing. When she brought their order, they thanked her. It was simple, but it made her pause. Something had clearly changed in them. For a while, the diner filled with quiet conversation and the gentle clinking of cups. The veteran finished his meal, folded his napkin neatly, and reached for his hat. As he stood up, one of the bikers noticed and quickly whispered to their leader. The leader looked up and said, "Sir, wait." The veteran stopped and turned toward them. The entire diner went silent again, just like before, but this time there was no tension, just curiosity. The biker stood up slowly, walking over to him. His voice was calm and steady. "We just wanted to say thank you for the other day." The old man looked at him, slightly surprised. "Thank you? For what?" "For not making fools out of us when you could have. For not embarrassing us in front of everyone." The veteran smiled faintly. "You embarrassed yourselves. I just didn't make it worse." The biker chuckled softly, nodding. "Yeah, fair enough." He hesitated for a second, then said, "You were right, though, about the noise. I've been thinking about that." The veteran studied his face for a moment and then said quietly, "Thinking is good. Acting on it is better." The leader nodded again. "That's what I came to do." He turned around and looked at the waitress. "Ma'am, I want to apologize for how we acted before. We were rude. You didn't deserve that." She blinked, surprised. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. "That's kind of you to say," she finally managed. "Thank you." The veteran nodded approvingly. "That's a start." The leader looked back at him. "I don't know if you believe in second chances, but we're trying to be different. Maybe start doing something better with our time." The veteran leaned slightly on the back of a chair. "Everyone deserves a second chance. What you do with it is what counts." The group stood awkwardly for a moment, unsure what else to say. Then the veteran broke the silence. "What are your names?" They hesitated, then introduced themselves one by one. Simple names, everyday people behind all the noise and tough looks. The veteran nodded to each of them, repeating their names slowly as if trying to remember them. When they were done, he said, "You know, people remember you by how you make them feel, not by what you say or how tough you act. If you want folks to think better of you, start by acting like the men you want to be." The leader looked down at the floor, thoughtful. "I think we needed to hear that." The veteran placed his hat back on his head and said, "Then don't waste it." He walked out of the diner quietly, the same calm steps as always. No one spoke for a while. The biker sat back down. The waitress refilled their coffee cups, still a little amazed. The atmosphere in the room was completely different from the first day they had walked in. It wasn't fear anymore. It was respect. After the veteran's truck disappeared down the road, the leader said softly, "That man. He's something else." Another biker nodded. "He didn't try to scare us, but somehow he did." "You know what I mean?" "Yeah," the leader said. "He made me feel small without saying anything cruel. Just by being calm." The waitress smiled faintly as she wiped the counter. "That's what real strength looks like," she said. Quiet, steady, and kind. They finished their coffee in silence, paid their bill, and left without the loud noise of their engines this time. They rode off slowly, like people who had finally started thinking about their lives differently. That evening, as the sun went down, the waitress sat by the window after closing. She kept replaying what had happened. The old man's calm presence seemed to carry a lesson for everyone, not just for the bikers, but for anyone who had ever felt the need to prove their worth with noise. A few days later, she saw something unexpected. The same group of bikers was parked near the community center across town. They weren't causing trouble. Instead, they were helping set up tables for a charity event. The sight made her stop and smile. Maybe the old man's words had done more than anyone realized. Later that week, when the veteran returned to the diner again, the waitress told him what she'd seen. He listened quietly, his eyes showing a hint of satisfaction. "People can change," he said softly. "Sometimes they just need someone to remind them who they really are." The waitress nodded. "I think you reminded them." He gave a small smile and took a sip of his coffee. "Sometimes words don't teach. Behavior does." The next time the bikers came to the diner, they came in respectfully. They greeted the waitress, ordered politely, and even offered to help her move some boxes near the counter. The other customers noticed, and soon the tension that once filled the room was gone completely. When the veteran entered later that day, the group looked up immediately. They nodded at him with quiet respect. The leader even stood up and said, "Sir, we saved your booth for you." The old man chuckled. "I appreciate that, but I think I'll try a different seat today." They all laughed softly. A genuine kind of laughter this time, the kind that didn't make others uncomfortable. It was clear now that something had changed permanently. What began as a moment of disrespect had turned into an unexpected friendship, built on respect and understanding. The waitress later told the cook, "Isn't it strange how one calm person can change everything?" The cook nodded. "Not strange," he said. "Just rare." That night, as the lights of the diner flickered off and the parking lot grew quiet, the waitress thought about how that one small moment of patience had started a ripple that kept growing. And out there on the road, those same bikers rode home under the fading sky, quieter, calmer, maybe even a little wiser than before. None of them would forget the man who showed them what real power looks like. Not in fists, not in words, but in calm. The next morning, the small diner was already alive with the usual quiet chatter. Sunlight streamed through the windows and the smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the room. The waitress was setting up tables when she noticed movement outside. At first, she thought it was another customer arriving early, but soon she realized it was the same group of bikers from before. Only this time, they didn't storm in with loud engines or wild laughter. Their motorcycles slowed and they parked in neat lines along the side of the diner. The leader, the same one who had spoken with the veteran before, stepped off his bike carefully. The others followed, all moving in a calm, almost respectful manner. The waitress felt a small surge of relief. It was clear they had remembered the lessons from before. Still, she watched them warily, unsure what they might do next. As they entered, the veteran was already seated in his usual corner. He didn't look up immediately, just sipped his coffee and read the newspaper. But the moment the bikers walked in, he noticed them. He set his cup down gently, his calm presence filling the room. The leader stopped a few feet away, unsure whether to approach or not. Finally, he spoke, his voice measured and soft. "Sir, I hope it's all right that we came back." The veteran looked at him and nodded slightly. "It's all right. You're welcome here." The bikers seemed to relax, their shoulders dropping some of the tension they had carried before. They chose a booth near the back, giving the veteran his space while still being close enough to interact if needed. The waitress approached cautiously. "Coffee and pie?" she asked. "Yes, please," the leader said politely. "And thank you," the waitress smiled faintly. She had served them many times, but this was different. Their tone wasn't demanding or rude. It was almost humble. Something had shifted in them, not just in behavior, but in attitude. While she poured their drinks, the veteran looked toward their table. He noticed small gestures, the way they sat, careful not to spill their cups, the way they spoke quietly among themselves. The change was subtle but unmistakable. One of the bikers finally spoke, addressing their leader quietly. "Do you think he's judging us?" The leader shook his head. "No, I think he's showing us what we should be." The veteran, overhearing the comment, didn't react. He simply continued sipping his coffee, letting the words settle on them. He had learned long ago that teaching through action often carried more weight than words ever could. Minutes passed and the diner returned to a sense of normalcy. Regular customers came and went, some glancing curiously at the bikers, but no one felt threatened. The quiet calm seemed to extend through the room, touching everyone present. Finally, the leader spoke again, this time addressing the veteran directly. "Sir, can I ask you something?" The veteran looked up, meeting his eyes. "Of course. I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day. About strength and control, about how anger isn't power, The veteran nodded. And? The biker took a deep breath. I want to change. I don't want to be like before, loud, disrespectful, just trying to scare people, but I don't know where to start. The old man's eyes softened slightly.
Change begins with small steps.
You don't have to do everything at once. Just one choice at a time. The leader nodded slowly, absorbing the words. I think I understand. The other bikers listened silently, their attention focused entirely on the conversation. No one interrupted, no one whispered. It was as if the veteran's calm had created a space where they could truly reflect. You've been through life, the leader continued. Seen a lot. How do you stay so calm? The veteran set his cup down, taking a moment before answering. You learn that most of what rattles people isn't worth your energy. Life throws storms, but the way you handle them defines you. Calmness isn't weakness. It's clarity. It lets you see what matters and what doesn't. The leader was quiet for a long moment. I've never thought about it that way. I've always thought being loud meant being strong. Loudness is noise, the veteran said. Strength is patience. Strength is choosing your battles. Strength is standing tall without needing to prove it to anyone. The words hung in the air, powerful in their simplicity. The bikers shifted in their seats, feeling the weight of the message. They hadn't realized how much of their life had been spent chasing attention, trying to show they were tougher than they actually were. I want to be better, the leader said finally. I don't want to scare people just because I can. I want to respect them. And respect myself. The veteran smiled faintly. That's the beginning. Respect is always earned, but it starts with how you treat yourself and others even when no one is watching. The bikers nodded, each of them taking the words to heart. There was no boasting, no fake bravado, just honest reflection. At that moment, the diner door opened again. A man wearing a sheriff's uniform stepped inside. He looked around, paused when he saw the bikers, and then his eyes fell on the veteran. Afternoon, Colonel, the sheriff said respectfully. The veteran nodded. Good to see you, Sheriff. The sheriff turned toward the bikers. I see you've been visiting the diner again. How's everything going? The leader spoke carefully. Good, Sheriff, we've been learning. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. Learning? The veteran didn't speak, but the look on his face was enough to explain. The bikers had changed, at least in that small space and moment. The sheriff smiled faintly. I'll leave you boys to your lessons then. He nodded at the veteran and walked toward the door. As soon as he left, the leader whispered to his friends, Did you see that? Everyone treats him with respect. Yes, another replied softly. And it's not because he's loud or scary. It's because he is who he is. The veteran overheard but didn't react. He took a slow sip of his coffee and let them come to their own understanding. After a while, the leader spoke again, this time to the veteran. Sir, can we do something for you? I mean, you've taught us more than anyone else ever could. Can we help you somehow? The veteran shook his head. You've already done it by listening. That's enough. But we want to, the leader insisted. The veteran leaned back slightly. Kindness comes from action, not words. If you want to honor what you've learned, go out into the world and help someone without expecting anything in return. That's the real lesson. The bikers nodded, understanding. They weren't used to guidance like this. No lectures, no punishment, no threats. Just wisdom delivered calmly and clearly. As the afternoon wore on, the veteran finished his meal. He placed a few bills on the table, nodded to the waitress, and prepared to leave. The bikers watched quietly, waiting to see what he would do next. When he walked out, the leader of the bikers stood up. Sir, thank you, truly. The veteran turned, gave a faint nod, and said, Remember, real strength is quiet. Don't forget that. He walked out into the sunlight, his steps steady, leaving behind a diner full of people who had seen something rare, the kind of calm courage that changes people without force. The bikers sat down again, reflective and silent. The waitress filled their cups one last time, smiling softly. You're lucky to have met him, she said quietly. The leader looked up, thinking carefully. I know, and we won't forget it. They finished their coffee and left, moving with a sense of purpose they hadn't had before. Even the other patrons noticed the difference. These were the same men who had once filled the room with arrogance and noise, now leaving quietly, respectfully. Outside, the veteran's truck disappeared down the road. The sun reflected off the windows, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Inside the diner, peace returned once more. The waitress and cook looked at each other. "He really does change people, doesn't he?" she asked. The cook nodded. "Not by fighting, not by yelling, just by being himself. That's the kind of strength that lasts." And as the evening light faded, it became clear that the lesson the bikers had learned about calmness, respect, and quiet strength was something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The small diner had seen many days, many travelers and many quiet lunches. But that afternoon felt different from the start. The sun poured in through the windows, casting warm light across the tables. There was the usual soft hum of conversation, the clinking of dishes, and the smell of fresh coffee, but beneath it all, a quiet anticipation seemed to linger in the air. The veteran had arrived early, taking his usual seat in the corner booth. His jacket was neat, his cap rested just so on his head, and his calm presence immediately seemed to steady the room. The waitress set his usual coffee in front of him, smiling gently. She couldn't help but watch the old man with admiration. Somehow he made everything feel safe without trying. As she went back to the counter, the rumble of motorcycle engines reached her ears. The bikers were back, the same group, but this time there was no swagger in their steps, no loud shouting. They moved with careful, quiet energy, as if unsure how to act now that they had learned a lesson they could not unlearn. They parked neatly outside, removed their helmets, and walked into the diner. The leader caught the veteran's eye almost immediately, and for the first time there was a flicker of something almost like respect in the glint of his gaze. He gestured subtly to the others, and they all followed, taking a booth a few tables away from the veteran, giving him his space but keeping themselves close enough to observe. The waitress hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Coffee and pie?" she asked. The leader nodded. "Yes, thank you. And sorry for before. We didn't act right last time." The veteran looked up from his newspaper, his expression calm but attentive. "Apologies are only words," he said quietly. "Actions speak louder." The biker paused, absorbing the words. "I understand," he said, his voice steady but softer than anyone had heard it before. "We're trying to do better." The veteran simply nodded, returning to his coffee. The room was quiet now, the usual tension replaced by something new, a sense that a lesson was unfolding right before everyone's eyes. Minutes passed in near silence. The other customers went about their meals, watching quietly but sensing that something important was happening. The bikers talked among themselves in low voices, discussing the things the veteran had said in the previous visits. They were listening, reflecting, trying to internalize the wisdom he had shared. Finally, the leader spoke, looking toward the veteran. "Sir, can I ask you something?" The veteran set his cup down slowly, meeting the man's eyes. "Of course. How do you stay calm when people provoke you? When they disrespect you or try to make you look small?" The veteran leaned back slightly, considering the question. "You learn over time that most people don't act with wisdom. They act with fear, frustration, or anger. When you see it for what it is, you don't have to react the same way. Calmness doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from understanding it." The leader nodded, absorbing the words carefully. "So, being loud or angry isn't strength?" "Not at all," the veteran said quietly. "Strength is patience. Strength is clarity. Strength is choosing your battles and standing tall without needing to prove anything." The bikers looked at each other, silently realizing the truth of his words. For years they had relied on noise, force, and intimidation to make themselves feel bigger. But here was a man, calm and composed, whose presence alone held more power than their loudest efforts. The leader shifted in his seat. We want to change, but we don't know where to start." The veteran's eyes softened. "Start small, one choice at a time. Treat people with respect. Speak truth quietly. Don't try to be bigger than anyone else. Be better than the person you were yesterday." Another biker, younger than the rest, finally spoke. "What if we fail?" "Then you try again," the veteran said simply. "Failure is only permanent if you give up. Real strength comes from standing up each time you fall." The words settled over them like a quiet weight, deeper than anything anyone had said in a fight or argument. They didn't need to shout, threaten, or prove anything. They just needed to think, reflect, and choose differently. At that moment, the diner door opened again and the sheriff walked in. He paused when he saw the bikers, then his eyes landed on the veteran. "Afternoon, Colonel," he said respectfully. "Good to see you, Sheriff," the veteran replied. The sheriff's gaze swept over the bikers. "I see you've been visiting again. How's everything going?" The leader straightened slightly. "Good, Sheriff. We're learning." The sheriff raised an eyebrow, curious. "Learning?" The veteran's calm demeanor said it all. No one had to explain. The sheriff nodded faintly, understanding that the lesson the veteran had taught was unfolding perfectly. The bikers stayed quiet, reflecting on the sheriff's presence and the veteran's calm authority. None of them spoke out of turn. They were beginning to understand what it meant to be strong without shouting, to lead without threatening, and to respect without fear.